badly, especially when they are words that pass judgment on someone else. In particular, when they pass judgment on someone's inherent self-worth. Case in point that is very personal. I can remember as a young boy, there was a person who was busying themselves comparing me with another child that was about my age, and this person said that the other child was really going to be somebody. They were going to be a manager. They were going to be a boss. Someone who gets things done. But to me, they said, but Michael will always be a ditch digger. I was probably about Charlie's age when those words were said about me. And I haven't forgotten. I can say after a long period of time and reflection, I've forgiven it. But contrary to what some people will tell you, forgiving and forgetting are two entirely different things. And sometime we might have a message about the difference with that as well. But here's the kicker. The person who was making these statements was a member of my church, and if memory serves, they were making those comments in church. We are so quick to make judgments about other people, and yet we are so slow to look at ourselves. And I'm going to be honest here, church people, sadly, can say some of the meanest things. Here we are, we're supposed to be the light of the world, and we do things like this. The words that Jesus says at the beginning of chapter 7 of Matthew create a bit of a challenge for us when we take them into the context of the greater Sermon on the Mount. And if you are starting to get tired of this series, the good news is there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think we have two messages left in this series, and then we will move on. But there are some things that are worth taking time to go through. If the Sermon on the Mount is about calling God's people to be part of the building of the kingdom, and I believe it is, and if Jesus is working on getting us to the heart of the law, which I believe he is, and if Jesus has made clear our need for personal holiness, I believe he is, how do we balance all of these with the call not to pass judgment? Much of the Sermon on the Mount is about personal holiness. When we get past the introduction with the Beatitudes, what's the first things he does? He warns us against anger and lust. And he warns us on how we are to maintain our integrity. This is all holiness material. How do we take that and then balance it against what Jesus is saying here? Don't pass judgment. Does this mean then that nothing matters? Or is there something else at play? Well, to better understand, and if I go past here, I know you've got, you're not going anywhere for me? I'm thinking, I get too many different rabbits that I'm chasing. Okay. So, put in context here, and we tend to do this a lot, and it's easy to pick on the Pharisees, but to be fair, I think that when Jesus says these words, it is highly likely that it is people like the Pharisees that Jesus has in mind. For this reason, if I've not mentioned it before, I will at some point again, but the Pharisees were all about following the various rules of the Torah, even the ones that specifically applied exclusively to the priests. Now, because we have 2,000 plus years of time between us and them, we have a little bit of a hard time understanding that, and especially given that many, I would probably be willing to say most Christians in the modern era don't spend a lot of time reading in the Old Testament law for some obvious reasons. we get a little bit of confusion here, and it's easy to get detached here and not quite understand what's going on with the Pharisees and all of this. But there were certain elements, especially if you read in the book of Leviticus, because Leviticus comes from the root word Levites. This was particularly focused on the role of the priesthood and a certain set of rules that were set aside for the priests. I don't think all of those rules were set aside only for the priests, but a good chunk of Leviticus was aimed at the priesthood. Well, the Pharisees believed that all of the people of Israel, in order to be a holy nation, a holy priesthood, if you will, should be trying to keep all of the law. And in a certain sense, if it was done in the right way, that was a good thing initially. That the intention was good, as they sometimes say. But it quickly devolved into what at best can be called legalism, and at worst a form of hypocrisy. The Pharisees were quick to tell other people who weren't Pharisees and who were not Levites that they weren't following the Torah like they were. For example, let us consider again how they complained to Jesus about his followers picking grain and eating it on the Sabbath. But Jesus will turn around on them and confront them with their hypocrisy by pointing out that they press these laws, but will turn around and decide what they were meant to use, take care of their parents, they declare it as Corban or dedicated to God, and leave their parents destitute. Let me explain what all that was. Back then, there was no Social Security, there was no Medicaid, no Medicare, there was no social safety net, as it were. And the only Social Security in those times was to have children. That's why women who had no sons were considered a curse, because if there's no son, then there's no one there to grow up and get married and have kids and manage the farm or manage the family business so that then you can be okay in your old age. Children were Social Security back then. But if, as a Pharisee, I would go around and say, well, the money that I am morally obligated to use towards the taking care of my parents, I declare as Corban, meaning it is a gift to the temple. I'm getting around that. And my guess is that there was probably a little bit of a kickback from the establishment to the gift giver. So I think that there was a little bit of what we call today a tax shelter going on there. Anyway, that is to help you kind of understand what Jesus gets at. We didn't read that passage today, but maybe you've read it before, or wondered before, what is Jesus getting at with all of this? That's that. So Jesus is pointing out their hypocrisy. And you may remember a couple of months ago that Jesus wanted to reveal to the people the central truth of the law, and it very much seems to be our standalone verse today, verse 12 from chapter 7, essentially, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And what Jesus is going to say here must be taken into that context. So beginning with verse 1 of chapter 7. Do not judge others. This is from the New Living Translation. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. So let's unpack and break this down a bit. First of all, do not judge others, and you will not be judged. But if we are to follow the law of God and be His example to the world, then how is justice going to be done? Because justice and truth and righteousness very much are a part of God's nature and God's plan. Well, going back to the Pharisees, I think what we are being told here is that it is not our job to be constantly watching what everyone else is doing and passing judgment on them. He goes further and says, for you will be treated as you treat others. This is either a comfort or a terror, depending on what type of person you are. you're a peace seeker and try to be the hands and feet of Jesus to everyone around you, then this is good news indeed. But if, let's say, you're the type that tells kids they're going to be a ditch digger, might be something you might need to be concerned about. Yep. Then we have a part here, and it depends on the translation. But the translation I have here says, the standard you use in judging is the standard by which you'll be judged. Now, people can use that word standard in a couple different ways, but what do we mean by a standard? Traditionally, a standard was a measuring stick. I've got two of them here. This fellow, and I've got this fellow. I watch Bluey with my kids too much, so I refer to inanimate objects as fellow. So, this fellow and this fellow here. Alright? So, a standard was a measuring stick, or surveying rod, as in this case. Too many of us, and what tends to happen, all of us tend to walk around with two measuring sticks. Moral measuring sticks. They're kind of like this. We got a big one, and there's a trick with this one I'll show you in a minute. And then we've got a little fella here. We tend to use this one on ourselves. We tend to say, oh, yeah, I'm doing all right. You know, yeah, I'm good. But then with our friends and our neighbors around us, we'll come and say, oh, you need to make sure you measure up. And they say, well, I'm working really hard. I think I'm doing pretty good. You say, oh, but you forgot about that one thing. You forgot about that one thing the other day. I go, I'll try to do that. Then you forget about this part here too. The little quick things don't work in this thing anymore, so it might collapse on me. But oh yeah, you're just not measuring up here. Yeah, try as you might. I'm probably get about halfway up there with this thing. This is a surveying rod. Here's the trick. Jesus said the standard by which you measure other people is the one you're going to get measured with. Here's the problem. You go around doing this. Someday Jesus is going to say, hey, you might stand up here for a minute. Ruh-roh. We'll put this thing aside for now. Jesus is saying that when judgment does come, it's going to get reversed. But I thought you said there's not going to be any judging here, you might be thinking. Not so. Didn't say there wasn't any judgment. That Jesus said, don't you be the judge. Part of the passage, I think, is to get us to understand that we need to leave judgment to the legitimate judge. There is a judge. There will be judgment. There will be a setting down of saying, these are the things that have caused harm and grief and pain to my children in the world, and they're going to be dealt with. And then these are the things that have brought joy, and I want to lift them up. But that's not our job to do. It's God's. Judgment belongs to God and God alone. But if God is the judge, why all of this talk of mercy from Jesus? And this gets something, I think I might have brought it up before, that tends to be a real issue in the church today. And unfortunately, it's so easy to fall into this trap, even for myself, because we are a society that likes labels, because we feel like by giving ourselves or others a label, we can then say, okay, I don't have to get into nuances. But the problem is life is all about nuance. But in the church, as well as in the wider society, we tend to like to use terms like conservative, liberal, traditional, progressive, orthodox, modernist, to describe ourselves and others a form of judgment. But what is really at issue is this. Jesus is giving us two commands here in the Sermon on the Mount. And they seem, at least for us, to be butting heads. One is a call to justice, righteousness, and holiness. To say the things that are of not benefit, that cause harm and brokenness and disfigure the creation, including ourselves, particularly ourselves, those are to be avoided, and God will pass judgment on them. But there is also a call to mercy, love, and forgiveness. And they're equal calls. They're both commandments. And we tend to come to God saying, we as narrow-minded humans tend to look at these as mutually exclusive. We say to God, how can you be merciful and just or righteous and also be forgiving? But they are not mutually exclusive with God. God is capable of being both fully just and totally merciful, and there is no contradiction with it. For God, justice is mercy, mercy is justice, forgiveness is righteousness, and love is holiness. What we tend to do as Christians, we tend to go to one camp or another. We either go to the one camp that focuses exclusively on love and mercy to the exclusion of justice and righteousness. And the problem with that is that when we do that, it's not truly loving, because to ignore injustice is not to offer love. But then the counterpoint is also the case. Whenever we lean fully into righteousness, holiness, and justice without love, that is not just. Instead, that turns into vengeance. With human beings, it is impossible to find that balance, and yet with God, it is possible. And when we allow Jesus to live and work in us, then we are able to find that balance. We tend to think that we have to be one or the other, but the call is to both. To drive this whole point home, Jesus uses a funny analogy. And I'm convinced he meant it to be funny. I'm convinced Jesus had a sense of humor. He says, why worry about the speck in your friend's eye? And I do woodworking, so a speck would be like a bit of sawdust. I've gotten sawdust in my eye before. It is very irritating. You can't keep your eye open. You're trying to go around like this. It is very difficult. So that'd be a speck. He says, but how can you worry about and try to get the speck out of your friend's eye when you have a log, like 2x4, sticking out of yours? It's kind of a humorous image that Jesus draws here. He says, how can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you with a little bit of sawdust in your eye when you've got this big board sticking out of your eye? He says, hypocrite, first take care of the thing that is hindering you, then you will know how to be able to help your brother or sister. And I think what Jesus is saying here is that our desire for righteousness, justice, and holiness needs to begin on the inside first. Let your desire for judgment first be turned inwards, but also with a balance of love there as well, because it is not uncommon, in fact it's very common, for us to tend to be our own worst critic. I know that I am. But if we're going to use this fella, use this one for yourself, but always with the loving words of Jesus in your ear, reminding you that you are loved even when you don't measure up. And show mercy. Use this one to those around you. Let the love of Jesus flow out of you to the world. Don't worry, they will see righteousness when they look at your actions, when you live in this way. They don't need you to beat them over the head with this. They need you to live this so that then they will see Him at work in you. So that they can see Him. Leave the judgment to Him. He is the one who shows both justice and mercy to all, who died to save the very people who killed him. That is love. That is grace. Amen.